Shalom. Welcome to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. And later on in the show, in just a few minutes actually, we will be joined via Skype by Mukesh Kapila, who will be Skyping in from Geneva, Switzerland. I hope you will stay on for sure and listen to Mukesh Kapila, who's a wonderful man and activist for humanitarian affairs and also in the field of global health. This week in the world in 5 minutes, I wanted to just talk a little bit about what's going on in the world. We'll be able to get to a little bit more of it next week than we will this week, but this week, the United States continues to press for a resumption of the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. We have an article that was released by the Tower, which is the Israel Project's blog, that detailed a little bit of the peace negotiations between Ehud Olmert and Mahmoud Abbas from 2007, I believe, is 2006, 2007. And there's a desire to try to get somewhere in the peace process. And we've talked a little bit about the difficulty of getting there, finding a solution that's going to work, not just territory-wise, which seems to be among the easier things to deal with, actually, but the other issues that are involved in the process as well. We're looking at developing situations in Syria with the United States and Russia both trying to figure out a way to get to a government that's going to be stable and helpful. Israel is also certainly concerned about not having hostile, active rebel groups on its northern border controlling the weaponry that currently belongs to the Syrian government. So there's a very big concern there. And there was an event yesterday in London that was quite shocking for a lot of people, which was a man or a couple of men, I guess, who claimed to have been acting in the name of Islam, who killed a British soldier brutally in the middle of the street. And clearly there's a concern about people acting on their own and conducting personal jihad, basically, in the Muslim community. But there's also the concern, if you're paying attention to what was going on there, that people simply milled around and nothing really happened for 20 minutes. No police, nothing showed up. Evidently, there was a concern that because the police don't have arms there, they don't carry guns, they had to delay their response. But if you think about a terrorist action going on, the fact that it took 20 minutes for anybody to show up, it was pretty much a miracle that more people weren't injured in that situation. The issue that's going on with Sudan right now, and we'll talk a little bit about this with Mukesh Kapila, the situation in Sudan. There continues to be a humanitarian crisis in Sudan with mass starvation, particularly in the Blue Nile and South Kordofan regions where the Nuba Mountain, the people live. And there's also ongoing conflict. The conflict itself seems to be escalating. The Sudan Revolutionary Front has been able to conduct some military activities that have been successful. The Sudan Armed Forces have tried to respond and have failed. And there also seems to be, at least recent reports that I've received have said that Iran has dramatically increased its flights into Khartoum, delivering weapons potentially to be used by the Sudanese government against the rebels in the south, potentially destined for Syria, and some potentially destined for rebels and militants in the Gaza Strip and potentially other parts of Egypt as Iran tries to organize against those opposed to it. So there are a lot of different conflicts that are going on we will see in the coming days and weeks how some of these develop. But that is the world in 5 minutes. And this is Understanding the World. Dr. Mukesh Kapila will be our guest when we return from a short break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Drink, dance, party. Kitty's is the ultimate dance club in Des Moines. A huge dance floor with room to move, 3 bars to keep your drinks full, and kickin' DJs playing all your favorite dance music. At Kitty's, we've always got your birthday party planned with Birthday Fridays. That's right, when your birthday rolls around, there's only one place to go. Gather up your friends and head to Kitty's, where you drink free on the Friday of your birthday week. Find out more about Birthday Fridays at kittysusa.com. Kitty's, all kinds of people, all kinds of music, all kinds of fun.
Drug and alcohol addiction slowly steals a person's identity, tearing away pieces of their life little by little until one day it seems like the hope of a happy future is gone and there's no chance of getting it back. Here at St. Gregory Retreat Centers, we can assure you that there is hope. Our unique approach to recovery begins with the understanding that the dysfunction and damage caused by addiction can be overcome, not just dealt with. Don't let another day go by. Call St. Gregory today.
Whether you're 10, 25, 50, 80 years old and beyond, everyone needs to live within their means. I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America. For almost a quarter of a century, we've helped people of all ages learn to manage their personal finances to benefit them far into the future. When problems arise, we've got the experience you need to make those debt problems go away. Got financial problems? Call Consumer Credit of America.
If Tom Coates from Consumer Credit of America was your personal webmaster, Tom would filter out all bad debt emails. If Tom was your mailman, you'd never get any debt reduction junk mail. If Tom Coates was a lineman, he'd block any phone calls offering to reduce your credit card debt.
Hi, I'm Tom Coates with Consumer Credit of America, and we're still your best choice for credit counseling. We're local, we're accountable, and we can do more. You make the call when the time's right for you.
When it comes to competition, there really is none for Consumer Credit of America.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, Jewish Community Relations Director of the Jewish Federation of Greater Des Moines. Our show today is brought to you with the support of Dr. Ronald Bergman and Bergman Folkers Cosmetic Surgery and Spa. We thank him for enabling us to do the work that we do. And we are honored to have with us on Skype today Dr. Mukesh Kapila, who is Skyping in from Geneva. Dr. Kapila is a professor of global health and humanitarian affairs at the University of Manchester. He's also special representative of the Aegis Trust for the Prevention of Crimes Against Humanity and chair of Minority Rights Group International. His book, Against the Tide of Evil, published by Mainstream, was released in March of 2013. Professor Kapila has extensive experience in policy and practice of international development, humanitarian affairs, human rights, and diplomacy, with particular expertise in tackling crimes against humanity, disaster and conflict management, and in global public health. My interaction with Dr. Kapila has primarily involved our Sudan efforts. And Dr. Kapila, we are honored to have you with us on the show today.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join you.
We have to get our microphones on here, our headsets on here so we can hear you. So, Dr. Kapila, can you tell us a little bit about your recent book?
Yes, I decided to write the book after spending 10 years summoning up the courage to do so. And basically, it's about my experiences in the Sudan 10 years ago when I was the head of the UN and the whole Darfur genocidal violence started. And having witnessed that and gone through that, as well as also having been present in other genocides like Rwanda, Srebrenica, and mass atrocity scenes like Sierra Leone and such like, I thought I would tell the world my side of the story of these historical events. But it's been painful because I didn't want to live those events all over again. But when friends said to me, well, you can't be too precious with your emotions. You have to share the dilemmas you face with others because they might be faced with the same challenges. So that persuaded me after many years to put pen to paper.
And I know you had a lot of concern about how the UN has responded to genocides over the years, particularly Darfur, but even the more recent ones. Can you share some of your sentiments on that?
Well, the UN, and by the UN we mean the international community, including the institution of the United Nations, but extending beyond the bureaucrats of the UN, totally failed us. They failed us in Rwanda, they failed us in Srebrenica, they failed us in many such situations, and they certainly failed us in Darfur. And they failed because even though we had, in the case of Darfur, the first genocide of the 21st century, the first genocide of the global media age, we had plenty of information coming in real time, we had plenty of early warning, so the alibi of lack of information couldn't be held as an excuse here. Despite all that, the leaders of the UN and the powerful member states refused to act, even though we knew so much. And this I can only put down to institutional cowardice, as well as lack of leadership, and indeed leadership failure or leadership cowardice at the very top. And there are many, many geopolitical and reasons we can debate, but fundamentally at the heart of it is really lack of accountability on the part of the decision makers.
Dr. Kapila, this is Mark in Des Moines. How are you, sir?
Hi. Good.
My basic question is, when you look at a situation that is going to break out into mass hostilities, what is the first thing that occurs to you? What jumps out as being the tinderbox of these things?
Well, in the circumstances where I've been, it's been hatred. Most often, the trigger, the stimulus, whatever you call it, is the hatred of one group for another. And the reason behind that can be economic, can be ideological, but very often it is plain, unvarnished racism. So certainly, I think where you have hatred as a visceral reaction, then these atrocities and genocides happen. So, and at the heart of them are, of course, the most vulnerable civilians. It's the us and them difference. When groups of people construct an image of themselves and construct an image of the other, and then us attacks the other, and then these things happen.
We've talked quite a bit about the challenges that are going on in the Nuba Mountains right now, and in Blue Nile. Can you talk a little bit about what you've heard and what you've seen in going on there, and also the world's reaction to it?
Yes, I was in the Nuba Mountains and in Blue Nile State in January this year, so quite recently. And what I saw there was not just what I saw in Darfur 10 years ago. This is the 10th anniversary, of the start of Darfur violence, but at an even higher level of atrocity. Basically, in the Nuba Mountains, vast areas of the country are totally cleansed. You can drive for mile after mile and you see nothing except burnt fields, destroyed villages, barren countryside. And then if you look very carefully, you see people, mostly women and children and elderly, hiding in impossible-looking cracks and holes in the hills and in the rocks. And you look more closely, and you see that they're malnourished. Virtually 2 out of 3 children are malnourished there. And you see them frightened. And then if you hang out in the region long enough, as I did, then you look up and you see Antonovs of the Sudanese Air Force flying over you and dropping their bombs, burning the fields, burning the villages, and such like. And as you wander about, you begin to see the means for making war. You see the remains of, for example, the missiles that have been used, the heavy bombs and such like. The difference being from Darfur 10 years ago is that in the intervening period, the technology of making war has improved. So whereas in Darfur you had Janjaweed on camels and horseback, today their equivalents, the Popular Defense Force in the Nuba Mountains, they ride Toyotas. Whereas in Darfur, the nature of the bombing was relatively crude. In Nuba Mountains, you have precision bombing. You have, in fact, over-the-horizon artillery, and you have the use of landmines and cluster bombs. Landmines are banned under the Ottawa Treaty, which Sudan has itself signed, but clearly a violation. And so you see what you're seeing in Nuba now is modern 21st century warfare against helpless civilians. And this is reflected in the cleansed land where people have been killed or disappeared or left. And the refugees are increasing in number into neighboring southern Sudan, as well as, of course, virtually everyone is internally displaced. Roughly 1.2 million people are affected in the Nuba Mountains, with the numbers growing every day.
Dr. Kapila, what are several possible strategies that should be considered in trying to stop violence?
Well, depends on the nature of the violence. I think clearly when the violence is of the sort that I saw in the Nuba Mountains, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. So when the violence is the sort I saw in the Nuba Mountains, in other words, of an ethnically targeted nature, this is the targeting of the traditional black African Nubian tribes by Khartoum Arab-led government. So clearly it is of an ethnic or genocidal nature. And the attempt is to eliminate a way of life and a group of people on account of their identity, and to eliminate means cleanse them of their land, ensure they don't return, and so on and so forth. When you see violence of that nature, then I'm afraid the verdict of history is that little can be done without the use of force. No genocidal dictator in history has ever been removed without the use of force, whether it has been Hitler, whether it has been Pol Pot, or the genocidaires in Rwanda. Now, I'm not a man that advocates violence. Certainly not. One would, coming from India, the land of Mahatma Gandhi and peace, one would much rather go down the peaceful track. But when one's basic existence is threatened, basic fundamental human right of living is threatened, then no one else can stand in the way of actually people defending themselves. Ideally, therefore, people in the mountains should be defending themselves, help to defend themselves as they are. I mean, one of the reasons why Bashir has not won is because the people are mounting quite a strong resistance. Meanwhile, what the rest of the world should be doing in terms of reducing this violence and dealing with the underlying problems is certainly ensuring that Khartoum doesn't have the means to wage war. To use a MiG, Sukhoi fighters, the missiles, and the technology of war that I saw requires resources. It requires money, either to import and buy these weapons or to make them locally. And both is happening in Sudan. And the rest of the world appears to be going on doing business as normal with the genocidal regime in Khartoum, and which is not just a question of doing nothing. It is a question of actually aiding and abetting the gravest crime known to humanity. So I think those economic sanctions, political sanctions, arms embargoes, and so on are the obvious things that should happen. Remembering also that there can be no peace, there can be no conflict resolution without justice and accountability. Again, the lesson of history from all over the world is, and going back to the Second World War and even before, that peace cannot be sustained, until there is justice also done. So just making a peace agreement, in a way, is not worth the paper these agreements are usually written on. And without that accountability taking place, and those who have been committing these mass crimes, these mass murders being brought to account in some way, there can be no sustainable solution to what is going on. Meanwhile, of course, while the world wakes up, or while the local resistance gets rid of the genocidal regime in Khartoum, or a resolution takes place politically in due course, people have to be kept alive. And basically, when I compared what I saw this year in January to barely 9 months ago last year on a similar visit, I was shocked at the physical and deterioration of the state of the people. Because for 3 seasons now, they have not been able to grow their food. The land is very fertile, and so you can grow all the food you want. It used to be a very fertile place. But for 3 years, a scorched earth policy, 3 growing seasons, a scorched earth policy has meant that the coping capabilities of the people have gone. And so we've got to really make sure that through humanitarian assistance and other support, the people are kept alive so that they can remain in good spirits and resilient until there is change.
Dr. Kapila, some very wonderful people that we know define themselves as pacifists, and they are very active in peace movements. Do you have an intellectual understanding of pacifism from a moral point of view? And does pacifism play into the United Nations in any significant respect?
I have a great deal of respect for everyone who seeks peaceful solutions to our differences. Obviously, that's to be desired. But if pacifism veers towards condoning evil, which is what these mass atrocities are, if pacifism means not knowing the difference between right and wrong, if pacifism means that people who are committing these crimes are not held to account for what they're doing so that they learn and do not do them again, as Bashir is doing in Nuba Mountains, basically repeating what happened in Darfur, except worse. If pacifism means all of that, as it tends to in the minds of many pacifists who don't really think through those issues, then I certainly, am dismayed by that particular approach. I think we have to be realistic in this world. I think these mass atrocities, these are logical acts. These are acts of hatred committed by governments. Usually genocides are always tend to be committed mostly by governments, if not all by governments. They have a command and control. They come from the very top, and they have all the might of the state behind them. Now, obviously, one can change the ideology of the state through social action and political action. Absolutely, one is all in favor of that. But the weight of history is that in crimes against humanity of this nature, pacifism usually doesn't work. It hasn't worked in the past. And meanwhile, we have a sacred duty to both help people to stay alive and to help people to defend their dignities and their lives. This is very important. I think pacifism does not mean buckling under the force of evil.
Well, I guess I'd like to ask a kind of related question, which is about the title of your book. One of the things we run into is a refusal to call people evil and to define something as good and something as evil. There tends to be more of an attempt to define things as cultural differences and religious differences and things like that. And I think you're right in calling what's going on in Sudan evil, not just a difference of opinion, not just an effect of war. How do you deal with that kind of discussion?
I use the word evil in the title of the book and my kind of conceptualization of that evil, in the sense that these are extreme acts of hatred, and our lexicon is deficient in applying any other words. So we have to recognize these things for what they are. if, for example, we fudge the issue, for example, the normal way we fudge issues is we call genocidal violence ethnic cleansing. And actually, this is because we don't want to use the word genocide. And actually, this is watering down the issue because there's no difference between ethnic cleansing and genocide, actually. So I think it's a moral and ethical duty for the sake of protecting the most vulnerable, not to hide the facts or to play with words in such a way that they diminish the horror that is going on. Because if that results in either confusing the issue or providing an alibi to the wrongdoers, the extreme wrongdoers, then I think we are doing a grave disservice to the cause of humanity. So I use the word evil deliberately, it's a deliberately chosen word, to signify the rationality of actions by the leaders who are actually orchestrating these kinds of violence. And ordinary people must understand that. These are not mad people. This is not about crazy people. What's going on is a carefully calculated state acts of great rationality, organization, and sophisticated planning and implementation. So what other word can one apply other than evil?
Dr. Kapila, how would you evaluate the Human Rights Council of the United Nations?
Well, the Human Rights Council, like all the committees and councils on many subjects, where nations of the world get together and talk, is by definition a good thing. It's better to talk than to go to war. And generally speaking, the only way people are going to talk is if they gather together in committees and councils. So let me start off by saying that. And the United Nations is a globally accepted forum belonging to all of us where we can talk. However, the institutions such as the UN or committees like the Human Rights Council are only as good as the way they're organized and those who contribute to their deliberations. What that means is that, disappointingly, the Human Rights Council, because of the way it works and the way it compromises and has to balance the different state interests, it's a political body. It means that it has been an ineffective forum as far as the protection of rights of many people around the world are concerned. I think it's been ineffective, particularly in acute situations. It's a reasonably good forum for long-term change in the world, for basically general improvement in tolerance and rights of this, that, and the other, and such like. If you look at it from a long perspective, then committees like that are helpful in improving the norms of the world. But they're no use at all in terms of the acute problems and the existentialist threat faced by people such as the Nuba Mountains.
Dr. Kapila, how do you evaluate the concept of nationalism?
Of nationalism?
Yeah.
Well, I think if nationalism means that a group of people or their leaders, a country's leaders, consider themselves to be superior in all aspects or in many aspects to other places, other people, other nationalities, then I think this is very much to be opposed in a way. If nationalism means giving people a sense of pride and dignity in their history, in their culture, in their families, in their communities, in their way of life, so that all nationalities stand up and proudly and hold their head high in a world of diverse nationalities, then it's a good thing. So nationalism per se is a question of whether it's good or bad, depending on whether evil-minded leaders are, exploit it for their own purposes or not. And the problem is that, unfortunately, too many communities around the world are vulnerable to the blandishments of evil-minded nationalist leaders. And this is where nationalism gets, understandably, a bad name. I think, however, at the same time, I'm drawing comfort and some optimism from the fact that we live in a globalized and interconnected world where people's nationalism or national identities is shaped not just by where they live or the color of their skin or the color of their passport, but by other attributes, maybe a shared profession around the world, maybe a shared interest, maybe football, or whatever. So in a way, we inhabit a world more and more where people are cutting across nationalities, and that must be a very good thing for the more old-fashioned, corrosive, and selfish nationalism that has brought the world so many problems in so many places.
We're going to take a short break here in just a minute, but Dr. Kapila, when we get back, I'd like to talk a little bit about the economic situation. The money owed to the World Bank by Sudan and South Sudan put together, the solutions that seem to require that that South Sudan ship oil through the North, giving the North plenty of money. Interaction with Iran and Iran helping to supply the regime of Sudan and enabling them to use weaponry against the South, and all of those kind of things. We'll talk a little bit about that, maybe among other things we talk about after a short break.
From the RE/MAX Real Estate Concept Studios, this is Webcast One Live.
I'm Brian Leach, owner and general manager of Service Legends. I brought along a couple of the home comfort heroes.
Hi, I'm Tammy Wells.
I am Nick Wondershad.
I'm administrative manager.
I am the senior technician
from Service Legends.
It seems like every good thing, when you feel it to the bone that it's good, there's a lot of hard work put behind it. I don't think that you can fake it and have it turn out good.
You know, if we seem like, okay, that's just weird, it's just a furnace, why would you believe so deeply in a furnace? It's not just that, you know, we want to show the world that you can have good service.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to be, it's your home.
You know, it's built into our daily trainings, it's built into our culture, that we're going to do whatever it takes to have each client say they love us, period.
That's why we spend all the hours in the training that we do. And if we guarantee it's going to be a good experience for you, or else it's free, what type of work do you think we're going to do?
There is a guarantee.
Temperature selection guarantee, fixed rider it's free guarantee, comfort guarantee, best value guarantee. All of these guarantees hold us accountable to ensuring that we exceed your expectations. And if for whatever reason we'd fail and we can't make it right, we guarantee all of those guarantees with a 100% money back guarantee.
I mean, if you don't think that your technician can fix it right, are you going to say that to a client? No.
You don't have to worry about having a technician come to your house.
We drug test, background check all of our team members. We put safe people in your home. Each and every one of our service techs, 400 hours a year in training.
You tell it the minute they walk in the door. They know what they're doing, they've done their homework, and they actually truly care about what you want.
Because at the end of the day, you're the person that makes sure I have a job.
They're going to be listening. They're going to want to know what your challenges are. Then they're going to come and give you options, and you get to choose.
If I'm there to help and I make it easy and painless, I did my job right that day.
Well, when it comes to your comfort, safety, and your family, you know, you don't necessarily go buy the most expensive, but you get the most bang for your buck.
Oh, it's worth it, because there's a lot of people that will find a way to get it to work right now and then leave and then come back, charge you again, and the cycle just repeats itself. So when I'm out there looking at the furnace, I want to find why it failed today. How can we change the part today with something that you're not going to have to worry about? Is it worth changing the part today? I mean, you can put a lot of money into a furnace. I can fix parts all day. There's good job security in that for me. But is it the right thing for you?
I get a lot of the phone calls of after the technicians are there. They're just in awe. They're like, wow, you guys are great. I mean, I don't even know what to say. You guys are great. Everything you did was perfect. It was great.
Keep going, though. I like this.
Just give us a try. I'm going to take all the risk.
I've got the time to make this right. I've got the support to make it right.
Just check us out.
And if you don't see the value in what we do,
I mean, fixed rider, it's free or 100% money back.
Enough said.
Shalom. Welcome back to Understanding the World with Rabbi David Kaufman. I'm joined in the studio by Mark Finkelstein, and we're joined via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland by Dr. Mukesh Kapila. Welcome back as we continue on our show. I had suggested, Dr. Kapila, that if we went into the break, that to talk a little bit about the economic situation and the World Bank and the money owed the World Bank and the oil situation and also Iran and how Iran is working with the regime. Can you talk a little bit about some of those things?
Sure. There is no question that mounting a genocidal war of the nature of what I saw in Darfur 10 years ago, a region the size of France, and what I saw earlier this year in the other borderlands, in the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile, costs a lot of money. Also, a lot of money is needed to keep the military sweet and the elites happy, because without them, Sudan could not prosecute its war. So the economics of the genocidal war are very clear. Without those resources, the government would not have been able to prosecute these efforts. And undoubtedly, over the past 10 years, Sudan has got richer thanks to the oil, thanks to the trading and the greater integration of Sudan into the global economy. So there is no question that the economic relationships and the money that flows into Sudan from trade and oil and buying of oil has contributed to equipping the government in its efforts to unleash violence against its own citizens. So the fact that the oil is now starting to flow again after a standoff between Sudan and South Sudan is to be deplored, because it is in essence giving the Bashir regime the further means to carry on its particular efforts, because it's quite clear that without that it wouldn't be able to carry on. Meanwhile, there has also been talk to pay off the debt that is owed by Sudan by previous generations over the last 20, 30, 40 years perhaps, to the international financial institutions and such like. If that were to actually happen, it would be utterly disgraceful, because it would free money in the government's budget that wouldn't go to social services or improving health and education for ordinary people. It would simply go to further fuel the conflict and to further reward the military bureaucratic elite that runs the regime at the present time. So on this, I think it's quite clear. Further, while we're staying on the same theme, the recent peace, so-called Doha talks, which were about the pledging of funds for Darfur's reconstruction, are a total disgrace. In essence, what the countries that have pledged funds in Doha for Darfur's reconstruction, what they've done is to say, okay, so now the ethnic cleansing is complete, the genocide is complete, the land has been depopulated from its original black Darfuri tribal population and is being repopulated by the Janjaweed and the Arab tribes. We're now going to reward you for having done a successful genocidal project by building infrastructure, building roads, building all the elements that are necessary for development. And this is so utterly reprehensible. I'm just lost for words, what to say about it. As far as the South is concerned, that is South Sudan is concerned, for most of its history, since creation, South Sudan has lived outside the cash economy or the money economy. In other words, generations upon generations, for millennia, have lived basically on local subsistence and the local trading relationships and such like. For them, the oil is undoubtedly a bonanza as far as their future development is concerned, but the institutions of the country are not ready to prudently use these resources or to invest them for the development of the new state because of absorption capacity, weak governance and such like. So I think the rush to exploit South Sudan's oil has the disgraceful effect of basically fueling the conflict further, because it provides Sudan with the means to wage war because it has to go through Sudan. And at the same time, it creates governance challenges for the people in the South. So I can't think anything good will come of it.
Dr. Kapila, the topic of sanctions, there are plenty of people who are very responsible who believe that sanctions hurt the wrong people. Do you believe in the application of sanctions?
I think that it is only the application of sanctions that have brought about some major changes around the world. Just look at apartheid. In the end, what brought the apartheid regime down to its knees was when major financial players and industries started disinvesting alongside the social campaigns that went on around the world. The reason that Khartoum actually came to the negotiating table in Addis, and that's actually we should talk about in a minute, is because of the financial and economic downturn in Sudan. It even agreed to talk with the SPLM, the North, the so-called rebel group, on non-conditional terms. You wouldn't have done that without sanctions. And in any case, the way the Sudanese government applies its budget is not for the benefit of ordinary people. So we have a state within a state. We have large parts of the money, the majority of the budget, which is going into basically preserving the elite and the means for waging war. So as far as social goods is concerned, health, education, and all the other stuff that we take for granted in more blessed countries, they are not benefiting from all this wealth, which means that if you apply economic sanctions, they're unlikely to be hurting the ordinary people who are being hurt anyway. And the economic sanctions are likely to hurt the economic elite, which are behind the genocidal policies. And so, therefore, I think this would be a very smart way of doing it. In any case, I think the Sudan government, if it allows humanitarian and aid access, would receive funding for public health and education services. It should be paying for it itself, of course, rather than relying on the charity and the outside world. But if that was a concern, I think there's plenty of money out there in terms of aid for the suffering people. But there the issue is the Sudan government doesn't allow access for the provision of aid. There is no shortage of money that well-wishers want to spend for the well-being of ordinary Sudanese, with or without sanctions. But the Sudan government, which has a policy of obstructing any aid coming in, is basically responsible for its citizens not getting the basic rights.
Dr. Kapila, what do you think about NGOs?
Well, I think the NGOs are an important element of civil society in any country. But in the case of Sudan, we have some of the worst expressions of NGO action. For example, many of the Sudanese NGOs, so-called local or national NGOs, they are simply agents of the state. They are infiltrated by state forces, sometimes even military people or intelligence people in civilian uniforms, calling themselves NGO, cornering the resources that are coming in and such like. So I think those NGOs cannot be really considered in the spirit of genuine organizations in the non-governmental world that we have aspired to in terms of standards around the world. Then there are foreign NGOs, and they come in various forms. Many of them are struggling to gain humanitarian access, for example, to Darfur. That the access is virtually limited in vast areas of Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile. It's nil. Sudan government simply obstructs these organizations from working there. And then this has the perverse effect that non-governmental organizations who are household names around the world, who should be speaking up loudly on behalf of the voiceless, find themselves meekly complying with the policies of the Sudan government, and in a sense conniving with the divisive policies of the government, because if they say that if they speak up, then they will fail in the little access that they are given, and therefore the argument goes that they have to keep quiet and not say anything about all the wrongs that are going on, so that they don't get kicked out of the country. And unfortunately, when that happens, when we get to that level of connivance, then I think it's better that these NGOs completely leave the country, because in any case, what they do in Sudan is marginal. It makes very little difference. Most poor people and vulnerable people in Sudan, even in the Nuba Mountains and in Darfur, survive not because of foreign aid or because of NGOs. They survive because of their own resilience and their own capacities, however stretched they might be.
Dr. Kapila, do you think it is possible for humanitarian aid to come through South Sudan across the border that the SPLM North is in control of in a substantial enough amount to be able to help? And is there a way to push that? I know that governments have been reluctant to do that because the government of Sudan doesn't want South Sudan to help the rebels at all, and there's attempts to appease them. But it would seem to me that with SPLM North controlling at least 40% of the border of Sudan, that humanitarian aid should be able to come across that border in a pretty substantial amount.
I think firstly to say that in my own visits to the Nuba Mountains, to Blue Nile, I did not see any humanitarian aid going astray as a consequence of the soldiers of the rebel SPLM North. In other words, the idea that you can't provide aid alongside the SPLM, these groups who are in opposition to Khartoum, because the aid might get into the wrong hands, is total rubbish. The armed opposition to Khartoum relies on the support of the local population, and it would be their own goal if they started stealing food from the mouths of their own wives, grandmothers, and little children. If anything, I saw how these groups are actually protecting, defending, and sharing what little they have with their own civilians. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to say is that it is possible to provide smart humanitarian aid in such a way that it doesn't mean lots of white faces, lots of Western organizations trampling all over the countryside, crossing the border illegally, getting in the way, and costing a lot. We have to trust local organizations that are working in the rebel-held areas and in South Sudan, because they know the land best, they know where the access points are, they know how to cross the border in a way, and we have to trust the people themselves. For example, I saw for myself that the food and other relief aid that was being given to refugees in Jida, just over the border in South Sudan, what the people were doing was they were eating half of it, and half of it they were carrying on their heads back into Nuba Mountains. Now, I think that's great. So more and more what we should be doing is we should be supporting cross-border operations from wherever the borders are, whether it's South Sudan or Ethiopia or elsewhere. It needs to be done discreetly so that and certainly we do not wish to embarrass any neighboring governments, but it is a duty to keep these people alive. And sovereignty, national sovereignty, is now conditional on national sovereignty is now conditional on basically the government honoring its social contract with its own people. So what that means is that under the circumstances where a government is led by a genocidal dictator who is indicted as a war criminal by the International Criminal Court, the legitimacy of the government is gone in Khartoum. Not the legitimacy of the state of Sudan, but legitimacy of the government of Sudan. We have to distinguish the state is bigger than the government. And governments come and go, but the state remains, and we must respect the state. What that means is that I cannot see any objections to cross-border assistance being given. In the way we've done it, we did it in Afghanistan, we did it in Cambodia, we've done it in many other places. In my 30-odd years of working in global humanitarian work, I have myself have been part of many such operations. So I don't see what the problems are legally, ethically, or any otherwise in the case of the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile in particular. And I wish we could do more cross-border also in Darfur.
Dr. Kapila, is it wrong to assume that the population itself in northern Sudan should not be demonized? Is there a way to communicate with average people?
Oh, absolutely. I think you hit on a very important point. You know, the Sudan government is expert at dividing and ruling. What that means is it divides the world, one country against another, and we see this fragmentation and why there is a lack of a comprehensive approach by the UN and the African Union. It also divides its own people, and Sudan is blessed with much diversity. Over millennia, this wonderful civilization along this historic Nile, one of the cradles of our common humanity, has been torn apart by the internal divisions that have been generated. And now what is happening in the heartland of Sudan, along the Nilotic Arab core, if I can call it that, is that ordinary people, these are ordinary poor people, eking out a living in the slums of Khartoum or in little farms here and there, they are feeling the effect of the rapacious policies of their own government. And what should happen now is that the ethnic groups that have been borne the brunt of the violence in Darfur, Nuba, Abyei, Blue Nile, of Black African tribes, they should reach out with the vulnerable Arab groups, because they're equally suffering now, more or less. They may not be the subject of ethnic targeting, but otherwise they're certainly suffering deprivation. And if they could unite and find a common cause, then I think this regime will not last very long. And I think this is what we should be encouraging the opposition to do.
Dr. Kapila, if you had some time to spend with President Obama, what would you express to him?
Well, I would say simply that he's in a very, very special position as a leader of the United States. He came with great hope, and it's very disappointing that he is not using his position to actually make a fundamental difference and bring about a change in Sudan. We know that the Sudanese government, the Khartoum regime that is very vulnerable politically, economically, and so on. We know that it is very sensitive to American opinion, or indeed Western opinion. Therefore, it doesn't necessarily require a great deal of political courage to do this. So I'm quite honestly perplexed as to why this is proving such a difficult call. If one can say the things that he's been saying in relation to the regime in Syria and previously in Libya and so on. And we must remember that the Assad and in Tripoli, those presidents were not indicted by international criminal courts. And even though the United States is not a signatory to the ICC, there has been a legal process whereby the president of Sudan has been indicted as a war criminal. Of course, he has to appear before the court, and it's for the court to determine his guilt or not, as a way, but at least been indicted for alleged war crimes. What that means is that actually, as far as legality is concerned, it's the only country in the world where there is a case for regime change being happening, because clearly a genocidal leader cannot be allowed to remain in position. And I do not understand why Obama is so sensitive and is so disappointingly meek about it. And my own experience in Darfur of 10 years ago told me one thing, and that is, it is not what you say when you speak up. It is the platform from where you say it that makes a difference. So when I spoke up as the head of the United Nations, it was effective in its scope, simply because, not because of me, but because of the symbolism of my office. And that had an impact at that time. Too little, too late, perhaps, but at least it drew the world's attention to what was going on in Darfur. The point here is that the sacred platform that the President of the United States occupies in trust for the American people, and because of America's position in the rest of the world, for the peoples of the world, it's a duty on his part to use that platform for bringing about change in Sudan and in the cause of global humanity, which is also in the national interest of the United States.
It's a very, very complicated situation. And
no, it isn't. No, let me interrupt you. No, let me not interrupt you, if I may. It's not a complicated situation. The problem is that when people make it complicated, when they drag in many factors, left, right, and center, and this interest and that interest, then people get disempowered. Leaders get disempowered. It is actually a very simple situation, and the situation is that a racist, ideologically supremacist, fascist regime, if I can call it that, in Khartoum, is engaged on a genocidal war. We have evidence for this, and this is also the world's longest-running genocide. And no genocide in history, at least in recent history of several hundred years, even before the word was invented, has lasted this long, in a way, a decade. It's actually very simple. Once we realize that it is evil being visited by evildoers, and then it is actually very simple. It is a duty to use all means at our disposal to get rid of this evil as quickly as possible. It is not a matter of culture. It is not a matter of complexity, etc. No culture, no religion in the world teaches you to rape, murder, pillage, and do the sorts of things that are being done in Sudan. No political system in the world says that you've got to crush a people on account of their identity and so on. So actually, we have to explain to the world that the matter is actually very simple. And it is doable to remove this regime. And the best way to do it is, of course, the people of Sudan themselves doing it, and they should be in the lead for doing it. But we, from the outside world, must support them from doing so. Or if we are unable to support them, we must not stand in their way from doing so. And yet we do stand in their way from changing their lives, from protecting themselves, from surviving, by the nature of the relationships, self-serving relationships, that economically, politically, and so on, the powerful countries have got with the Khartoum regime. Therefore, actually, the rest of the world is culpable for aiding and abetting the prosecution of war crimes in Sudan. Obviously, the moral responsibility, the primary responsibility is that of the genocidaires themselves, the regime in Sudan. And clearly, this is not a moral equivalence issue here. But those of us who stand by, those leaders who stand by and do nothing, or worse, they undermine the actions to remove this regime or bolster the regime in ways, then I think that is almost as culpable as those who commit the genocide themselves.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. That the challenge is to make the situation understandable and to point out to people that they actually need to do work. And I say in the Jewish tradition, I quote Rabbi Tarfon, who said that it's not up to you to complete the work, but neither may you desist from it. You have to do something. You have to take on the daunting challenge, and we each individually can do that.
Or absolutely, and as Mother Teresa in another tradition said, we're not always asked to succeed, but we must always try.
Absolutely. Well, Dr. Mukesh Kapila, thank you for joining us today on Understanding the World. Thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of poor and suffering peoples around the world and in promoting an end to the genocide in Sudan and the peace for the people of the Nuba Mountains and Blue Nile and Darfur and for all of Sudan. Really appreciate all of your efforts and thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
And that has been Understanding the World for this week. Next week, our guest is Ishmael Khaldi, is a Bedouin Arab Muslim Israeli diplomat who will be with us next week, next Thursday, May 30th. I hope you will join us for that as well. Have a good week.